Up here a little bit on the rant, but two things folks are feeling, right? What I'd recommend, we have a limited span of control represented in this group, right? A lot of us vote for Oliver soon, might have some Schofield folks in here, might have some Swans. So we have, right, we don't, vote for feeling. So what I'd recommend, we've got to better organize, right? We've got to better understand who are the constituents in Feeling's district and tell them, look, we'd be more than happy to come out there, block walk in the primary, as an example. Right? So as you go to the Capitol, as you attend these other groups, True Texas Project, these other groups that are trying to strengthen how the grassroots organize across the state, you got to start to build those relationships. And then when you target certain reps, folks like us, we could go to any House district that we could that we want to try to flip. So it's a kind of a longer game, right? I mean, I think what Tom said, right, you can know your bills, get down, try to advocate the bills you want, try to get the meetings with the folks that don't really represent you. That's the first question they ask, right? When you go into those office, where do you live? Who's your rep? And oftentimes, I mean, you can have some influence, but I don't think it would be as strong as if you're your actual rep, okay?
One of the other things, last session, the women's sports bill died in State Affairs Committee. Well, the chair of State Affairs, we were either going to censure him, but it turned out he didn't run again, so we had at that point there was no reason to censure him. So Chris Patty's gone, so we'll get somebody new to chair State Affairs, where a lot of the legislative priority bills do go.
All right, guys, now into election. I got a little bit more content in here than just the legislation, but that was what the ask was, and that's what the promise is. So I'm going to provide a summary. You guys have seen this, right? We live in Harris County. We are grassroots. We're activists, most of the folks in this room. So you've seen a lot of the headlines, right? And a lot of this, certainly Betancourt, has manifested itself in some bills and try to fire up some, at least the representation that we have here in Harris County to maybe get something done. Here's the file today. This is maybe a week or so behind. I'm trying to use Tom's tracking sheet to sort of filter in this, but you can see in the Senate and the House, right, the blue, that's your Democrats. So you see the bills that they have filed versus the red is what the Republicans have filed. So I cover both of them in here, but you might guess what's in the blue, right? And so when you see this coming up, I assure you when they, hopefully it's just but if they become control of these bills, they file every time. They don't get much traction. They don't even get a hearing. Most of their bills don't. And but if they do get in power, you can be sure that this is their ideas that are coming. All right. So let's go here. So Senate on the Democrat side first, right? They want to make it easier, the younger folks to vote. There's a couple different variations on this one, but basically that's the net of it. They want to be able to folks allowed to register through the internet. No problems there, right, guys? A national popular vote, right? So think of this one. I just don't understand the logic behind this, but basically, we'll reverse this on. If the state of Texas elected Biden, but the state countrywide elected Trump, they would reverse Texas's vote for Biden to Trump. So see, it plays both ways. But they think they've got the numbers, so they're okay with the national popular vote to override the vote of the people that live in the district, right? That's that one. Unbelievable. You will see the language. If you don't believe me, go look at these bills. They want to make it easier for criminals to vote, including specifically calling out pedophiles. It's in the bill. You can't miss this. They want to expand countywide voting. Right now, certain county sizes, based on the size of the county, do countywide voting. They want countywide voting in the entire state. Bad idea, terribly bad idea. They want increase to make it easier for polling locations on campus. I thought this was already the case. I mean, I've been down to Texas State when Turning Point was down there, and it was like 3 football fields long of kids in line to vote. So I thought they could already do this, so I was surprised to see this one in here. Automatic registration, naturalized citizens. So as soon as the immigrants take their test, they don't have to apply to register, they just want to make it automatic. And so on the Republican side, again, we're still in the Senate. They'll increase penalties. There are several versions of this. Of course, there's more volume in the House than the Senate, but they want to, in cases, any kind of the fraudulent like thing, if you know you're registering an invalid voter as a deputy registrar, if you know your vote and you're illegal, right? Any kind of fraud, bad harvesting, most of those penalties in there, and they want to move them from Class A to a second-degree felony, or in some cases, they want a state, a prison penalty, felony. This one, I think Coke filed this one, is it's interesting. I don't know. We participated in a voter roll analysis a couple years ago, and there were several. There's literally, I don't know, it's probably tens of thousands of people that are registered to vote from a commercial address. Some of these commercial addresses, not just a UPS station, but storage centers. I found like 60, 70 people registered at a warehouse. This warehouse had just barbed wire around it. No one could live at this place. So Cold Course is saying right now, if you get a notice confirmed, you're on suspense, it could be 2 elections, so it could be up to 4 years. So she's saying if your address is commercial, and you haven't voted in 24 months, 25 months, you automatically get this notice. And if they don't reply back, they automatically go on suspense. So I think it is a good bill. I'm concerned that we'll even allow people to register at a commercial address. But some of them are valid, right? Because you could have, nursing homes. There's other examples rehabilitation centers. Those kinds of things are commercial. Sometimes zone commercial. Trailer parks is another good example. This is the big one. This is Bencourt's bill here, and there is a House equivalent Swanson's carrying, right? It's establishing election marshals. So these would get appointed by Secretary of State, or each of the counties would have to identify who their representation are. And this is really meant to, during an election, if someone identifies fraud, that we can get marshals in there immediately to prevent the fraud. Because we know if the fraud occurs, and we don't get to do the investigation for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months afterwards, they're not going to overturn the election. So if the fraud is found on an election day, send some people in right away to resolve this matter. And there's other things. Impound the election equipment. So if you determine fraud, you impound the equipment, and other authorities get access to it. And I like the expanded injunction filing. So this is allowing people like precinct chairs to file cases. You can't do that now. You have to be a candidate. So that's in this bill. And then some other emergency procedures really to escalate through the courts immediately, faster resolutions on these open items during an election. Oh, sorry, I went too fast. I think there's something here. Okay, so I'm on the House now. I'm switching from the Senate to the House. These are the bills that are in the House that are all more the same that you just saw on the Senate side. So I got a few new ones in here I'll add that our Democrats in the House have added here. They want to allow student IDs from campus IDs to allow us ID. So think through that. They don't have the procedures to look up driver's licenses or to validate people's citizenship. They just want a student ID to allow it to be a valid ID. That's one really bad idea. They want to expand curbside voting for non-disabled people. So how many people in here are judges? Or what a pain in the arse it is to actually set that curbside voting. They want to expand this, make this easier. And then emails, phone numbers of precinct chairs. So they want that published as Texas Secretary of State. And then the last one is a ranked voter. We saw that before. So on the House side for the Republicans, and I know I'm going pretty quick because I want to get to the content I'm really interested in sharing here in a second, because you guys can get all this up on TLO, Texas Legislation Outline. Increased penalties, several more of those in the House side. You can see the font's getting smaller because there's a lot more bills here that I'm interested in. Serialization of mail ballots. This is a Steve Toth bill. It's a really good one, right? Because right now when mail ballots are shipped out and they're bounced around, they're not deliverable, wherever the Postal Service picks them up, maybe returns them, maybe doesn't. Right now we want to put a serial number on. The trick here is you don't want to tie the serial number to the voter. That's illegal, you're breaking the law. So there's some tricks behind it, but it at least helps us validate X number of serialized ballots have been sent out, right? So it does give us an opportunity to reduce some fraud with mail ballots. Proper prepositional language, to me it's a minor one. Closed primary, big one. So I think Brian Slayton put one, that's his bill here, to get the closed primaries. Separate, this is Schofield's bill here on this one. So what he's concerned of is, we saw what happened, what is it, can't remember, what's the act that Pelosi and company were trying to pass on elections where federals would take over. So in their, what's that? HB1. So what this one will do, what Schofield's trying to do is say, hey, if the progressives move forward on that agenda, let's separate the federal from the state and local elections. We'll control our elections, and obviously we don't want federal dealing with federal elections in Texas either, but this gives us a little bit more protections. I don't know if that will get much legs, but we'll see. Uniform election dates, this is another good one, right? To solve the problems where we don't get anyone to show up at our school board elections to vote. This is the equivalent to the Betancourt bill. This is Swanson. Swanson filed this one here. Again, it's probably the omnibus. You saw in the last session, that's what happened. A lot of the good bills end up merging and consolidating into one bill. I think you'll probably see the same thing here, but that's the companion bill to Betancourt's. This is another really one. This is another Toth bill, Steve Toth. Right, what this is allowing you to do open records requests on questions that you have from the information provided by your election administrator. Right, so if anyone here has looked, and I'll talk a little bit about it in here, but I know some people in here have looked at it. If you look at their own reconciliation log here in Harris County, right, they do things like total mail ballots sent out, total mail ballots returned, total mail ballots turned in, total mail ballots rejected. So you take that top number, everything sent out, minus all those other ones, that should be what's left. That equals total mail ballots cast, right?
Right.
It doesn't foot.
No.
It doesn't foot. And we got numbers between 8,000 and 9,000 off. Right? So they're also, so to me it brings questions to people, how can you certify this election if you can't do basic math correctly? So what this bill allows us as citizens, precinct chairs, whatever, you can submit questions to the administration on those questions. And if you don't like the answer, you can get a clarifying question, and they have a reasonable amount of time to respond, and through that you can end up escalating. So I think it's a real good bill for citizens that want to kind of pay attention to what's going on in the election. It gives us some ways to investigate further. Software, hardware for election machines to be manufactured in the United States, good one. And then a reduced early voting period. That's a Slayton bill. I didn't see any version of Bob Hall's bill in here, or the one that we were talking about earlier about just election day. That's not been filed yet. At least I hadn't seen it. So those are the bills. Now I want to cover a little bit here and get into some of the stuff that I know I've talked about here in the past, and it's really about the notion of, guys, if we're not paying attention, we're losing the country, right? So emotional. So my plea is, I'm going to lay out an argument here in the next few slides about why it's important that you got to participate. Because what we're up against is our tax dollars are being paid, right? We're paying employees for all the counties in Texas and at the state level to do their job. A big part of that job is maintaining the voter rolls, right? So we have to babysit them. That requires volunteers to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do with our money. And that hasn't been done, and it has not been done well in Harris County for at least 6 years, okay? So I'm going to lay out an argument why that, and give you an understanding, maybe you can appreciate more the amount of work we're talking about. All right, so this past summer, I took out a project. Alan Barrett asked me to do this, and it quickly got into the Chronicle. But basically what we did, the premise is that we targeted homes in Harris County that had 6 or more registered voters at a residential address, right, that had 3 or more last names. So that was this project, and we knocked on the door. This door here, this lady that took this picture, actually worked for the election administration, and she reported us. It didn't take long, got the Houston Chronicle. Soon afterwards, Rodney Ellis sent this to Washington, D.C., calling us racist, we're suppressing the vote. And so we didn't segment by R's or D's, we just said, look, any residents in Harris County that meets this equivalent. We didn't know they're R's or D's. And believe me, there were plenty of R's, and some of the R's that we knocked on the doors were jackasses, right? Where for us as volunteers, just trying to simplify and have some level of understanding of how bad or poorly these voter rolls are captured. I'm going to share the data on this. And what I'm going to conclude on this is the amount of time and effort this project took. This is one project, okay? So what the numbers look like. All right, so I just said, right, we targeted 6 or more people registered this home. That gave me 3,500 or so addresses. That encompassed 24,000, right, people living at those addresses. And it covered 781 precincts across the county. And we had to do this in 6 weeks, okay? All right, so in some of the data, 32 max number of addresses in a single precinct, right? You can see there it was in South Acres. We got, on average, 9 addresses per precinct. Right, now we've got 500 precinct chairs, right? In the party. And if all they did is touch 9 addresses, we could be done in a day. Right, with at least those precincts, right? 781 precincts, on average, or 9 would be done, right? And some at one address, One residential address, we had 33 registered voters. Also, you can see the address, that's the precinct is 157 acre homes. So, and then average the number of voters at each address. So of the total number of addresses that we targeted, this is some of the results. We were able to get, we didn't have enough volunteers, enough time to get every one address. So we hit about 2,500, so we processed 69% of that data. Of that, 99, about a third, 28%, we didn't get an answer. In some cases, our volunteers went back once, sometimes twice, right? But in some cases, we didn't get answers. And then of the ones we did get, we collected 1,500 roughly declarations, so 41%. Now let's talk about the voting impact that did. Right, so again, of the addresses we talked to, 2457, the impact of that touches about 14,000 voters, okay? Of those voters, that number, third would not participate. Completely voluntary. You see, you don't have to respond, we're doing this. I felt we got a better hit rate on receptivity than what it's shown here. So, but anyway, that's the number that refused. That's the number of impact that actually responded. Then the next number is really the important number. Because this means I talked to enough homes that touch 10,000 registered voters. We found 50%, 1 out of 2, is not a legal registered voter at that address. Wow. Okay, so that gives us a list of 5,000. Of that 5,000, we know just over 1,000 voted in this election. Okay, so we're running those down further. But that's the important piece. That's what I was trying to get to. Right, and Joe Campbell, stand up. Joe was the number one volunteer. We had about 140 volunteers, of which about 15 of us did 80% of the work. Joe, almost close to 700 of those 5,000 voters are Joe's alone. Okay, but look at the man hours that took. And those are man hours that really should be the county using our tax dollars to do their job. All right, another example. Let's keep going. All right, so you see this came out just yesterday. All right, so Lunsford is the judge that has filed lawsuit in the county, right? And Mike May is also contesting, so we're sure that the data that we can collect for Lunsford, it helps Mike, we're going to get him that data too. But here's the scope of what this project looks like, right? So what we do know is there's a thing called Troop NACOA. It's basically a national conferment of address. So if you move, you tell the post office that we are moving. You provide that notice. If you lie on that document, you're committing a felony because you're changing your address. So it's a serious deal, right? But those movements get fed back in, and people should be using that data to validate their voter rolls. Well, so the tests that we've been running the last 6 months to a year is testing. Other states are doing the same thing. So, but what we know is that over 100,000 of them have moved in Harris County in the last couple of years. Many are still on the voter roll. Now, be careful here, because moving within the county is acceptable. Right. However, we're talking about the problem with that here in a second, but let's build this out. Right, so we know of that 100 and some thousand, 56,000 voted in this election. They could be legit, but they could still live in the county, but they moved within the county. So, but every single one of them should have been asked. Those are the clerks in this room, run election or judges, you know, every single voter, whether you're prompted because they're on the suspense list or not, every single voter you ask them what?
Are you at this current address?
Do you live at this current address? Right? In some cases, you don't even need to ask that question. You're told you need to collect a statement of residence. But every voter, you're asking that question. Every one of these voters should have said, no, I don't. Therefore, they completed an SOR. So our job is to confirm this. So what I've got to do, or what this project is meant to do, is I'll bring out this bullet. The scary part for me is that Texas allows, other states do not allow this, but they'll allow that voter to vote in the election after they finish their SOR, right? For those that don't run the elections, right? But that voter may not live at the same ballot code at their new address that's in the poll book. So countywide elections are unaffected, statewide elections are unaffected, but House district elections would absolutely be affected. So they could gain this, there's no question, right? So here's the project. So we requested all the SORs. You know, I ran an election, had 450, say 500 people, and I don't see anyone I don't think here worked at my election, but it's probably the most SORs I've ever collected was this past election. So I'm saying 10% of 500. So there's a million people that voted in this election, just over 10%. It's 100,000 documents we're estimating we're going to get back from these SORs. Of that, we got to, and they're not going to give up. There's no void. There's no void in an SOR. So I don't have a unique number. I have a name, an address. They're probably going to redact the license or the last vote or the social. So we're going to have to look these people up and try to find them, and then come back to say, did every one of these people that had moved, did they fill out an SOR? Because if they didn't fill out an SOR, they are an illegal voter. Okay? So that's the task at hand. And this note just went out. If Andy, the lawyers, want this returned in a week, we probably need 400 or 500 volunteers. Wow. All right, if it gives us 2 weeks, we can cut that in half. So it's a lot of work. Tell your like-minded friends and neighbors. There's an email that went out. If you don't know about it, let me know. But the estimated man hours here on this project is here. But what's different about this one versus that last project, that last one was 6 months, and actually we got a little bit more time in that one, maybe 7 at most. But this one, we're going to have a very short window. So it's a high volume of volunteers that need to be managed at a very easy task in a short period of time. I'm going to this last one here. And again, this gets back to the same thing here, guys. We lose our country if we don't pay attention, if we're not involved. Our founding fathers certainly believed, we should be involved. It's our government. We get the government what we deserve. But here's an example, all right? This is on mail ballot side, and what a lot of us are discovering around phantom voters. Basically, these are voters that could be dead, they could be alive, they could be moved out of state. Doing that last 2 projects ago I mentioned up here, I think you could almost easily, you could randomly open up a phone book, pick out a name, pick out your address, and submit it. And the EA here probably is going to register that voter. Right? They shouldn't, but it's that bad. So let's look at the mailer, the recent election here. So Hidalgo won by, you can see, 17,000 votes. Right? Let's play this out. Right? So in 2018, of all the ballots cast, and so I'm looking midterm to midterm. I'm not looking at the presidential with Trump. Right? I'm looking midterm to midterm. 2018 election, 8% of the total ballots cast in that election were mail ballots. All right? 2020, this election, 5.4%. That's good, right? Because not only did the volume of total voters in this election go down by about 100,000, right? But mail ballots went down, not quite half. And that could be because of SB1, because the registration requirements on the application for a mail ballot, you now need a Texas driver's license, or you need the last four of your social, and they should be looking that up, confirming before I mail a ballot to your home, you are a registered voter. It is illegal for the EA to mail a ballot out to a non-registered voter. Okay, so anyway, ballots are down, fewer ballots, about 10%, 9%. So again, in the 2018 election, you actually had more voters, so this one went down. So that's the backdrop. Now let's look at this, total votes. So early voting votes, okay? And these are descending order. When I say that, I'm starting out with the part of the election that gave most of the votes. So you can see here, 680,000 votes were cast in that race, and 13% of Hidalgo's victory came from that volume of voters, right? So 63% of the overall race came from early voting, okay? And 13% of that contributes to her victory. Make sense? Yeah. With me? Yeah. All right, let's take a look at election day, right? So about half the total votes from early voting, it's about a third of the overall votes cast in this race, and it accounted for 18% of Hidalgo's win. Do you see where I'm going with this? Wait till you see this next number. Mail ballots, right? So mail ballots cast in the county is about 64,000. Right, that 5% of the mail ballots led to her victory, but or voted in this race, but 70% of her victory was based on mail ballots. You look at this across all other races, it's not close. We looked at Mike May's race, it kind of makes sense, because you would expect, right, that these numbers would be kind of close. Right, there might be some difference, but say those Republicans, they gave up after 2010, they're not doing any mail ballots anymore, you can make that case. You could, there's kinds of things like that, and that might contribute to some of that difference, right? But you know what the difference is there? I think we're being out organized, right? And I'm going to talk about that here in a second, but it's citizen participation. I believe it is ballot harvesting. but man, it's extremely hard to prove. If we're not willing to get off our couches, go out and knock on doors, and try to work with citizens that are willing to participate, this is going to continue. So, we could do a project on this. We could request mail ballot applications, right? And we could compare signatures to their actual mail ballots. Now, they'll redact some of that stuff. That may make that very hard for us, but we could do some of that comparison. But imagine the amount of time. I got to get, 54,000 or 64,000 mail ballots, 88,000 mail ballot applications, and manually compare them. That project would take at least that many man hours, okay? Now, who's heard of this? Texas Organizing Project. Right, these are the Acorn guys, okay? Right, so I want to call attention right here, right? So this is an NGO, it's a nonprofit organization. So anyone donates to these kind of folks, they get a tax reduction, right? So our tax dollars shouldn't be going to this organization, but people can donate to them and they get a benefit, tax reduction for it. But I'm gonna look at here, about top, look at, they've got a board, they got staff, and employment. So they can hire, they have paid employees to do what I was just describing to you on those last 3 projects. Right? 2,000 man hours, 2,500 man hours, 5,000 man hours. These guys have staff. They're raising money. They've got an organization doing the same thing I'm kind of talking about, but doing it from a conservative worldview. Right? Now watch this. I know you probably can't see, but I'm going to read off some of the titles. This is their staff. Go to the website afterwards. Here's some of their staff. Right to Justice Outreach, Immigration Justice Director, Statewide Communication Coordinator, Office and Data Manager, Organizing Director, let's keep going, HR Legal Compliance, or they have legal services, paid staff to defend what they're doing, right? Organizer, Data Manager, Policy Coordinator, same kind of roles, just Immigration Organizer, Researcher, a Technology Director, Policy Director, State Political Data Manager, Statewide Data Manager, Training, Statewide Bail Disruptor. That's a title, right? Statewide Bail Disruptor. All right, BCLI, don't know what that is, Coordinator, Statewide Electoral Strategy Coordinator, Community Organizer, Lead Organizer, Board Commissions. This will get down to local government kind of stuff. I think like site fair ISD kind of thing. Executive Director, Finance Assistant, Training Director. You get my point. Right? For every one of these organizations, this is the big one, but for every one of organizations like us, there's probably 100 of these on the Democrat side. That's what we're up against. Okay, so when you get pleas out here, and we send notes out to you guys looking for help, right? Sometimes it's some unique skills, and I think our biggest challenge is sometimes we get a large volunteer pool of people. Sometimes we don't get enough, unfortunately, but we don't get enough people to organize those people. So you need kind of middle management. When you get a whole big bunch of volunteers, you got to give them direction, right, on what to execute. So anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks for listening. I don't know where we are in our answer questions, but.
Thank you, Bill, for that presentation. Does anyone have any questions of Bill before we get into our rant?
I got it.
Go ahead.
Hey, Bill, is there any progress on merging the ESD and school board elections with county elections at the state level? Is there any bill?
Yeah, that was the one that said to move to a, I can't remember the term, but uniform election day, yes. Yeah, I think Schofield, a couple of people filed that, yeah.
Will that also get rid of May elections, or?
That's the idea, yep. Mm-hmm. I think it's really about any nonpartisan election. So the primaries typically in March won't change, but any MUD, ISD type election would move to November. That's the idea.
Do you have to be a Harris County resident to help?
No, great question. Other people have asked. You do not need to be. I mean, we're going to try to do our best to validate people. All right, last time I kicked this project off, I had a bunch of, it went to DC really fast. So someone amongst there was a mole, right, that covered up, and that became racist really fast. So we have to do a bit of a job to kind of validate people, make sure we don't get moles on the project. But yeah, absolutely. If you got friends outside of Harris County, love to have them participate.
Any other questions?
No.
Yes, go ahead. Lynn.
So the work that we did over the summer, and we turned in those names and filed those things, did any of them get
A
removed?
great question, because oftentimes it doesn't, but no, they did not. And so, but I did an open records request, because what's supposed to happen, remember that the first project I talked about when we identified 5,000 people, because folks like Joe went and knocked on doors, right, in 2,000 hours, 5,000 people, we filed affidavits. Those affidavits go to the county. What the county is supposed to do, and this was a law that was passed actually in the last legislative session, says that, hey, if any of us have personal information that voter no longer lives here, let's say it's your neighbor, and they moved out a year ago, someone else has moved in, you could, right today, you go to harrisvotes.com, you could bring up your neighbor's address, and I can see this gentleman still registered there. I have personal information that he moved out a year ago. I can file a complaint, an affidavit I submitted to the county. The county, by law, is to send him an address that is registered. It should get forwarded. And if he does not reply within, 7 days or whatever the law says, they put him on suspense. I'd say take him off completely, but that's not the law. The law says put him on suspense, which is BS, because now he gets to stay on that voter roll for 2 more elections. Right? So if you think about it, the people that are looking at the data can tell who's not voting. And they can phantom vote for that person, especially if this gentleman, if he moved in Texas, he'd get caught, because he's going to have the same VUID wherever he moved in Texas. But if he moved to, say, Oregon, which I've got neighbors in my precinct did it, their children, 2 children, adult children, moved to Oregon, unfortunately. In 2018, they're still on Harris County voter roll. So she's called to have them removed. We filled out an affidavit to have them removed. But to Linda's question, we filed, they didn't do anything. I sent an open records request to the county. What's the status of 100, I think we had 130, 140 affidavits. I got almost a near immediate reply, which I was surprised. They take no action. And then they have verbiage in there, they're kind of challenging some of the data, whatever. So we immediately sent it to Texas Secretary of State, filed a complaint there. They've acknowledged, like 2 weeks before the election, that they received it. They haven't made a judgment on it yet. Come the new year in January, I'm going to follow up with Secretary of State. But our intent is actually not to let that go. But what we do know is of that 5,000 people in that list that we know are invalid, we scanned those VUIDs against the people that just voted, and we know 1,000 of them voted in this election. Right? So they'll be part of this process. We'll confirm that they could be legal. They could be perfectly legit, but they shouldn't live, well, I guess they could live at that address. They would have had to move, then come back. But very, very suspicious. As we just talked to people 3-4 months ago, they told us they don't live here. Some told us, I don't know that person. I've lived here 20 years, I don't know any of those people on your list. That's the kind of stuff we were getting. So, good question.
So, did I understand that you said that these people would be on suspense, and then they show up and they sign an SOR and they're allowed to vote at their old ballot code?
That's correct, because otherwise, just like another voter comes into your poll and you can't find them on the poll, what do? You call the EA. Right, John Doe is here, I got their ID, I don't find them, can you confirm they are not on the voter roll? And sometimes they'll say, oh, they are, but they're not on your poll book, which I'm always suspicious about. But in that case, if they say, yes, they're on the voter roll, they give you a poll code, don't they? I don't know if you know, but
They're supposed to.
they're supposed to, right? But SORs, you're not making that phone call.
No.
They're going to get the ballot of where they used to live, which, again, countywide races, no impact. Statewide races, no impact. Federal elections, of course, no impact. But certainly local elections within the county would be an impact. Good question.
So Bill, there was, and maybe this is a Tom question too, there was a proposal or a bill to change, you said, all elections to being one time?
Uniform election dates. Yeah.
Okay, so.
That's been on our platform for, I don't know, as long as I've been doing this, but.
Forever.
Yeah.
But for like the nonpartisan races like water board and MUD, like you said, they're usually contracting with a third party person or sometimes with the county. But, so are you saying that would be required that they would have to use?
I don't know if the bill said required or not, but they're going to do it on a uniform election date. It would be hard for that sub-district to make the case. They're going to do it separate. I mean, it's not cheap. right? So just to tag on an incremental additional cost for the existing infrastructure out already for that November date. That's the reason one of the reasons as taxpayers, we should go to a uniform date because these elections are expensive. I would ask Scott, but do you know, Jennifer, what the town hall, well, I guess you did on a uniform election day, so the cost is a lot smaller, but if you do it completely separate, what was, Clark, do you remember the ESD 9 election, what the numbers we heard?